There we go. So class 10. There's only two things that we're going to be talking about: rescoping of projects, and then importance of like GitHub activity. Again, a lot of this I'm copying and pasting. I think actually all of this you guys have in your technical notes in Canvas. I just copied and pasted it from there. But it's actually very important to rescope a project as you go through. Some of you have been asking me these kind of questions in the past week or two of, well, we originally were going to do this, but then once we got into it, we had to like shift what we were doing or rethink about what we were doing. And that is part about being an agile team. So when they talk about agile, and then if interview questions ask you about agile, that's exactly what it is. It's here, I came up with this idea, we're going down this path, but we hit a roadblock or we hit something and we need to change to do something else. So being agile in a project is perfect, but then this talks about kind of how to do that in the best way. So part of project development is paying attention to the flow of the work. So, one team member might be going a little faster, one's a little slower. That's perfectly fine, but you're trying to feel that out. So there's going to be time whenever the deadline approaches, and you don't know if you can make it there. So you need to know when it's time to shift, or do you keep your original game plan? So that's what you're trying to rethink kind of today. It's a good time to think about these things. Do you want to shift to a different external API? Because some people have asked about that. Do you need to shift your authentication service to be coded slightly different? Do you need to shift your features? Like if you wanted to be able to search everything, can you shift it so you just search one thing? Do you want to shift it? Or is it something like you just have to do it that way because that's the core part and you just have to get as much done as you can? So reevaluating core features. You wrote up those project proposals. I have not looked at those. So I don't know exactly what everybody's project is. I like to focus more on the tech stuff, but you got feedback over those core features. If you need to change one of those, I don't mind kind of helping you rethink that, or maybe finding a technology that you can still get your feature there. You just might have to use a technology that's slightly different, because sometimes that's easier to do. Identify what can be shifted into a stretch goal. That's what many of you are doing right now. Like you're messaging me saying, hey, I want to do this, but we might have to move it to a stretch goal. That's perfect. If it was me, though, I'm still looking at, can I do enough of the functionality so that people can see that I know what I'm talking about? But then, yes, the final project is way, like, it's a little too far out there, so it'd be a stretch goal. So how much of that functionality can I do in the short amount of time that I have left versus doing it all? And then you need to start rescoping those things tonight. Hopefully you guys are meeting with your teams and kind of spend tonight explicitly on what core features do we already have, what things are we probably going to get done, so we're fine with, what things are we not going to get done and we need to either shift or change what we're doing, what do we need to move into more of a stretch goal, so that everybody's on the same page. So if you have any questions on rescoping a project, let me know. Importance of GitHub activity post-class. I'm going to read, obviously, what LaunchCode says, and then I'll tell you my personal thoughts on GitHub activity. It's definitely a place where potential employers, it says, are going to look. In my opinion, they could go to look to see if you've been keeping up with your coding skills. So while you've done a lot of work and you've done a lot of stuff at LaunchCode, LaunchCode wants to propel you into your next stage. And so it is absolutely important that you continue working on your development skills, even after LaunchCode. So if you're wanting to go into software development, if you're wanting to go into anything related to software development, you will have to keep those skills brushed up. You guys know how fast you can lose those skills. So you need to keep brushing up on those. And one way to show that off is in your GitHub. So it says here, what's my Cannot overstate how often we've gotten feedback from our company partners that they're unsure about moving forward with the candidate because that person hasn't had any recent activity on their GitHub account. I'll talk about that here in just a second. So tonight during studio, you'll have the chance to practice talking about your individual contributions and create a plan for learning post-graduation. So that's something else during your studio. You kind of want to talk through with your team. What are some great ideas for you to continue your learning post-graduation? Here are some suggestions that you can keep working towards. Join an open source project. I've heard a couple of you ask about if this or that project is a good open source project. I think about any of them that you can actually, if you feel like you have the skills to contribute to, go ahead and do that. Actually, Zach shared a website. I'm going to try to look that up, and I'll try to post it in my lecture resources. It's not technically an open source project, but it's where like nonprofits and people that don't have a lot of money post to get certain tech skills. And to be honest, it's kind of a win-win. You won't get paid for it, and you may or may not finish the project, but it might at least give you ideas to work towards and or partner with people. So now that I think about it, that might be a good thing for you guys to do, is because I think the hardest part is coming up with an idea that is worthwhile doing and being able to stay motivated, where if you're technically trying to do a project for somebody, it keeps you a lot more motivated. So yeah, I'll post that. Continue developing your liftoff project. So definitely, if your liftoff project is halfway there, you might as well just keep on working on it because you're familiar with it. There is a difference when you're working on different projects. It seems like we have went, just surface deep on a lot of things. So for you to create a brand new project and only go surface deep again, it really refines the skills that you need for that. So there's that idea of relearning the skills you already know to make sure that they are even better and easier to get on the front part of your brain. So that's one philosophy. The other philosophy is learning deeper skills. So either that's personal preference, whatever's going to keep you motivated, whether it's doing the same thing over and over again so that you are really, really good at those things, or if you want to take your liftoff project and say, well, I've never done this thing, and you start researching and going through and learning some of that stuff at a deeper level. Either one of those paths are fine. You have to figure out which of those that you would most likely want to do. You can also practice coding exercises like HackerRank. I have heard of Code Wars, but I haven't done Code Wars very much. HackerRank is not like full stack development. It's very much those algorithms. So I've talked with some people about, they were asking what key computer science concepts do employers ask about? And I said data structures and algorithms. Those are your key words that a lot of employers want to know about. Can you structure data in a way that it makes sense to both the programmer and the computer? And then can you write algorithms that can do things in a compact way? So HackerRank is good for those kind of skills. So I wouldn't do it all the time per se, like that wouldn't be only do that, but that is one thing that employers are looking for, that you can brush up on those data structures and algorithms. So if you had a project idea that wasn't selected for your group, you can work on that project. So I kind of already talked about that as well. Either keep developing on your own liftup project at a deeper level, or start a new one and really there are several things that you did during this liftoff project that you're like, if I did that again, I wouldn't do it that way. Go ahead and do a different project and don't do it that way. So it gets that muscle memory in. That's perfect. And that's pretty much it for lecture. So I'm going to look at the questions real quick. I do have a couple tidbits that I want to talk about the GitHub activity. So the question comes in. It says, what happens if we shift or change a feature to a stretch goal that reduces the number of features each team member ends up completing? To be honest, I think as long as it's not a huge thing, If it's more of a minor thing, I think you're fine. And or maybe you can pick up another feature that's a little bit smaller. I also know that some groups have lost members, so if that's a reason why not doing things, they'll be totally that's totally understandable. So I think it depends on what the thing is, but definitely reach out to me, and I'd love to talk through some additional things, or your IA, obviously, because they probably know your project better than I would. But Zach came in, LeetCode. LeetCode is just like HackerRank. So yeah, you can do LeetCode. I have heard of LeetCode just as much as HackerRank. So is it safe to share the progression of a project on GitHub if you believe it's the next big thing? How can we share, keep potential poachers? This is a great question, mainly because I have a unique philosophy with this, because I've actually talked to some venture capitalists and entrepreneurs in the Kansas City area. And so one of the people that I talked to that actually like invests money, like large amounts of money into entrepreneurials, he said that he hears this problem come up in entrepreneurials and he instantly does not give them money. If they're worried about their project is going to get stolen, then he doesn't want to work with them. He'd rather them focus on actually getting their project done, being able to get their project done, rather than being all this stressed about somebody else stealing it. If it was, I'm going to make an assumption, even the projects that you guys have worked on, even if they are amazing, I bet you somebody else has had the thought about doing them before. There's very rarely a thought that you come up with that has never been thought before. The difference is who's going to act on it. And if you're already acting on it, then you're the person acting on it. And somebody else that had that idea before, they didn't act on it. So you have the jump start of like, you started it, you keep working on it. And if you really think it's going to be the next big thing, you just need to finish it out before the other person, because then it's obvious it's your stuff. So that's my little thought process when I've talked to venture capitalists about who they want to invest in. They want to invest in the person that 100% believes in not just their own product, but their team, whether that's yourself or a whole team. They believe in themselves so much that they don't care. They're just going to work. So that's just my tidbits. Free Code Camp offers courses and data structures and algorithms. Thank you for posting that. So you can steal that from Tim before the chat closes. So the question, this is a good question. If you choose to contribute to your own project afterwards, should you fork the project and work on that fork? I definitely think that since you and your team are the ones that did it and it's just not one person, you do need to come up. So Lori, I like your answer that you need to come up with it as a team decision. On the other hand, if I was doing it, I wouldn't just fork it. I would clone it and then make my own repo and then import it in. So there's no attachment to the original project. But that's how I would do it. And I would not do that unless my team decided that I could do that, and or I put it in my repo and then made my team members contributors to that project. So just that's how I would do it. I would hate if LaunchCode accidentally deleted something, and I don't think the forks would go away, but I don't want any ties to something that then the project gets deleted. So if you want full control over it, you're just going to download your code and then you're going to put that code up in your own repo. Yeah, and then if you are worried about projects, there are timestamps. That's a great. Yeah. Any other last minute things here? I'm going to talk about this after I share off my my project. But so I did share this repo in the lecture resources before class. I didn't at students with that, so you didn't get a big, huge notification. But it is there. So I want to just show you kind of what's going on here. I downloaded this. I also just created it, so it's downloaded. And so just like before, I know it's hard to see on this screen, but I can't remember how to zoom in on this. So there I have a Java and a React. So the Java one, I'm going to open up with IntelliJ. I've already got my database set up. And then my React one, I'm going to open up in VS Code. So I'll show you both of these. So this one's my React one. This is VS Code. And then my IntelliJ. It's slowly coming up. Right. So what I did to create this project, I stole from what you guys did in the course for authentication. So most of the stuff that I'm going to show here is exactly what is in your guys' LaunchCode curriculum for Unit 2, dealing with sessions and stuff like that, with that J session. So what I have created here, obviously my application properties has my URL, my username and password, just like before. That's all standard. There is this web application config. All it does is it pulls in this authentication filter, which I created in a different folder or a different file. And then I added that interceptor in. I'm pretty sure this is how we were told to do this in Unit 2 in the auth section. And then the authentication filter, what I did was I had to change my whitelisting things. These API endpoints are the ones that I'm allowing people to hit without being authenticated. Everything else, they have to be authenticated. And then I did the is whitelisted. I'm almost positive this is identical to what LaunchCode suggested. I just copied and pasted, really. So I'm not going to go over too much of this. The key part here is it does look up the user from the session. So the HTTP session that comes in, it gets the session from the request, and then it goes to the user controller, which I set up as a user controller. I can't remember what we called it when we were doing it, but then I said get user from session, and I got the user. And if there is no user, if there is a user, so the user's not null, then keep going. Because remember, whenever you do a pre-handle, this screens every single request coming in. So as soon as a request hits my backend service, this pre-handle runs even before it gets to the controller. So this is what we're talking, somebody is talking about, like filter chaining. That's what this is. I'm adding in a filter in that chain of that progression. And then I could do almost anything I want to here, really. I could say add to every request that you put a smiley face in it. It really doesn't matter what it is, but I can say what to do. And a pre-handle happens before it actually hits my controller. So for this one, before it hits my controller, I'm seeing, is there a session and is there a user that's a valid user in this session before anything gets hit. And then there's some comments in here. Don't worry too much about that. But also, if I could also say unauthorized. So this is where it's going to say unauthorized. My user repository, and I took my to-do app and kind of redid the back end I kind of kept, but the front end I redid. So my to-do repository, I'm going to do this find by user and type in my user for my to-do, and then my user is defined by username. Those are just normal commands there. My user, get this JPA out of the way. My user is very similar to your guys's. I have an ID, I have a username, the hashed password, first name, last name, email, phone number, address, and then role. I'm not using role in mine, but somebody was asking about role, so I just put it in there as a property. The rest of this is just setters and getters, except for I do have this is matching password method in here. So I'll use this later. My to-do is just like before, except I did add a many-to-one join column user ID with the user. That's the only thing I've done before. Like, in addition to my previous to-do, I never did this one in front of you guys. So I added that many-to-one. Because LaunchCode already had these, I went ahead and just stole these. There's the login form that just has the username and password. And then the registration form has the first name, last name, email address, phone number, and address. And on my front end, I did not have enough time to make a form with all of this. So I actually hard-coded all of this, and I'll show you that. And you got, while we're doing Studio, I'm actually going to update this to actually collect these things. I guess one thing I wanted to show about the hard coding is how you can hard code in the front end just to see if it works. And so I'll show you that. The user controller, it has the get user from session. So it takes your HTTP session. That's like the request coming in. It gets the attribute of user, which comes in as an integer. And then it just grabs, it gets the user. Set the user in the session. I can set the user. These are just common commands. What you guys really care about is this. I switched everything to response entities. I have full control over this. So whenever I register a user, I'm going to look at the register form DTO. So the question came in this past couple weeks. Do I need this register form DTO? And the answer is no. You don't need it. Here's the difference if you do not use it. If I am collecting first name, last name, email, phone number, and address in my register form, along with my register form extends my login form, and my login form does my username or password. So the reason to have a DTO is when I go right here, I could do request body register form DTO, or the other option is doing request parameter and doing string first name. Request parameter string last name. So I don't know if you're starting to get what I'm talking about. Instead of listing these out anytime I want to talk about registration, what I can do is I can create a data transfer object. The only reason I'm creating this is so I don't have to keep typing these things out every single time I want to register. So hopefully that better explains why you use a DTO. You do not have to. It's just, do you want to write out all the parameters, or do you want to put them all into one model and then just call that one model? That's the difference. So whatever you guys already have going on, I would just do it, whatever it is. You don't have to change based on what I just said. But this is kind of what LaunchCode's auth thing looked like. So again, my backend service, I more or less kept the structure, the skeleton of it. I just changed the middle part. This is what I changed because it used to be time leaf. I changed it into more of a true API. So what I've done here is I said that I'm going to have a map coming back. A map just means a key value pair. So anytime I put something in my response body, I have to have a key and a value. So that's all that I'm doing there is my key and my value. This is saying if the existing user, because it's going to look it up by a username, if there's already a user by that username, it's going to say given user details. No, if it's not null. If it's not null, there we go. If whenever it tries to find by username, it already sees a user, it's going to say user already exists. So that's the first thing it's going to do. If I typed in P Hodges and then I try to sign in or I try to register P Hodges, it's going to go try to find my username. It's going to say, hey, you're already there. And it's going to pull in my user information right here. And it's going to say, is that null? Well, no, I already have a user. So my existing user would not be null because there's a P Hodges. So it'd say user already exists. And I would say something like bad request with all of these. Meaning if the username isn't in there or the password's not in there, I'm going to send back a bad request. If it is null, meaning they don't know who the user is, it's actually going to create a response and it's going to save that user in the database. Login's very similar. You're going to have a login DTO. This one has a login DTO, which has the username and password in it. And that's all it has. It doesn't have their first name, last name, whatever. It just has username or password. It's going to go look up the user by looking up the username. And then it's going to get the password from the login form DTO. If the user is null, we don't want the user to be null in this case because they're actually logging in. So you're going to say username does not exist because you didn't find a user by that username. But let's say that the next thing it's going to do is it's going to check the password. So this, remember how I said is matching password? I actually put on the user model. It's going to use that encoder and it's going to check the user that we're trying to check password hash with the encoded password that they're sending in. So that's what if the passwords don't match, then it's going to say it doesn't match. Else, it's going to set the user in the session. So whenever you log in, it's going to set that user to be in this session that I'm in. And then it's going to return it back. What's cool about this thing right here, it's going to attach that JSession cookie onto my request back. So I'll be able to use that user later. And then the logout just says invalidate whatever session that whatever session they just did, whatever J session that's coming in, invalidate it so that they cannot use that J session again. I don't know. And then redirect them to the login. I don't think I need that. I think yeah, I don't think I think that's from the time leaf. I think it's copied and pasted wrong. Anyway, this still works even with the logout because the only thing the logout needs to do is invalidate that session. So in the back end, the to-do controller, I'm going to get all to-dos. Here's the difference between getting all to-dos, because usually I would just say, hey, to-do repository, find all. But I changed this because several of you were asking, how can I like differentiate between users? So here's how I did that. I took the session that's coming in. I'm actually going to get the user from the session with that session, and it's going to pass me back the user that's attached to that session. And then whenever I return the to-dos, I'm actually going to find by that user, the user that's in the session. And I'm going to return it back as an OK, so a 200 response with the to-dos. Otherwise, I'm going to say, you're not authorized. That's if they can't find a user in the session. The deleting is very similar to my other delete. If the ID exists, then I'm going to delete it. The only difference here is the user again. I'm going to take the session that comes in. I'm going to grab the user from the session. And when I create the to-do, I'm going to set the description. Again, I was setting the assign to be kind of the user, but I'm not doing that right now. I've kind of tweaked it around. So I'd probably change this wording to make it more user-friendly. So just know these are attributes. They can be any attributes. Again, this is more of a template than it is like supposed to be a really good application. But this set user, I'm actually setting the user from the session in here. So the user doesn't have to know to set themselves in the to-do. the to-do will grab the user that's currently logged in for that session and set the user. So that's the whole backend. I'm going to start this just to make sure it works, and then I'll go to the front end. The front end, I'm going to warn you, I did not pull things out, and I did not make a context, and I did not make a service. If it was me, I would 100%, that's another thing that I would love to do if I had more time. Again, you know, I'm working full time while I'm also doing this. So just know that I would love to do even more. I just don't have the time to. So I made this in between some things. So I think it started. So the first thing I would do on the front end that's different than this code is I would 100% make a service. So I don't have it here, but if it was me, I'd make a new folder. I'll make this a little bit bigger here in just a second. I would make a services folder, and I would have a user service. Okay, I can make the code bigger. I guess I forgot the shortcut to make this bigger off to the side. Fine. Yeah, I'll definitely explain why. So services, and you'll see it in here, like it's kind of frustrating. Anytime you have a lot of excess code, like not excess, a lot of reused code, you want to be able to pull those in together. So the main thing that the service will do is it will do this prevent default. It will know the local host 8080 automatically, and this import Axios. I only have to import this Axios in my service, but the way that I've coded this, let me close out of all these, get them out. Okay. So in my login, I have to import Axios. In my logout, I'm importing Axios. In my register, I'm importing. In my create to-do app, I'm importing. And in my to-do list, I'm importing. So I'm sending requests in each of these things where if this thing became, let's say I had 1,000 components. You usually don't have that many, but it is very often that you might have 100 components. If I have 100 components, and let's say that this local host 8080, my default thing here changes. So now instead of pointing to Google - whatever, now it's pointing to AWS / whatever. I would have to change it here, and I'd have to change it here, and I'd have to change it here, and I'd have to change it in multiple locations. Where if you just create services, oftentimes the URLs, the endpoints, the way that you connect are all the same. So you can just go to one file or a couple files if you have several different services and do it in there rather than trying to hunt through all of your code. So that separation of concerns of like, what does your component do versus what does your service do? I would try to separate those out. Kyle, I'll answer your question. If your question gets too high up, remind me again to answer it. But I want to 100% answer your question, but I want to keep going here. So on the registration, these are just your normal use states, right? Like your consts. Here's where I have it differently. I would probably do this handle register in a service. So I'm going to close it up for just a second. And I would just mainly do this thing right here. Again, these are just basic on change. You set the username. This is what some people have been doing already. On change, you set the password to be this, and then a submit button to register. And because this is a form, it says on submit, I want to handle the register, like handle register, which is this function right here. What this is going to do is it's going to call out to my localhost 8080 user register. So that matches with the user controller. Remember the user controller I mapped as user, and then it says register. So then I go to register. So that's where it's going to hit at. on my back end. Here's where I said I hard-coded some things, right? Instead of creating a field for username, password, first name, last name, email address, phone number, and address, I hard-coded these. This is one way that you can get your app up and running a little quicker. You know that you want to create things, but let's say that you're having problems. If you hard code some of your properties, you more or less take them out of the equation whenever you're debugging, because you know that those flow through. So this is just one way that you can do this. If I was making this component already, I could just go ahead and set up my username and my password, and then just have a button that calls this. And then I could just click the button, and then the button would send this. And then I can look at my backend service and say, did it come through or not? Again, you wouldn't want that as your final thing. I'm just saying these are different ways to kind of debug some of these connection issues. Is go ahead and send what you think should be, see if that errors out. Because you don't know if it's always Axios, maybe it's something in here, maybe it's somewhere else. I'm just showing you different ways to debug. So this is one way, it's just hard code certain things that you want. The key thing with when you pass back and forth cookies, so that J session lives in a cookie, with Axios and other places, but with Axios, you want to do this, or else your J session, all of your user information does not get sent back to the backend. So if you don't have this, this will not work with J session. Now, those of you that did JWTs, I don't know if you need this specifically. There might be another way to send the JWT, but this does send the cookies, which the J session is 100% a cookie that you want to send back. So I got to send this. So that's how it gets sent. I collect username and password because those are the only things I'm collecting on the UI. When I hit register on submit, it runs this thing and it sends that message. So let's go ahead and run just the registration piece. So I'm going to hit this register button. And again, remember, I'm just all those other fields I didn't put. Also, I didn't do anything with CSS or anything with Bootstrap or anything with anything. So just know that that's not my, that would take me just as long to do that as it would just to create what I did here. But let's say that I want my username to be P. Hodges and my password to be P. Hodges. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this network and see what actually goes through. So if you look here, it sent to this 8080 user register. It was a post request. It got created. And this is the stuff that it sent. If you look, it set the cookie of the J session. So whenever I got this back, whenever it came back to me, it saved this session ID in the cookie. And all this other stuff you can look at, but that's the main thing that I want to make sure. It set a cookie. It's HTTP only. You can Google that. But my response, you see how, do you remember that my message in my backend, my register, it says message. This is my response body. I did a key and a value. So I did my message and then I sent my message. So right here is my message and my value for it. So whenever you, and so then I'm going to log in. So the login is the same way. I'm going to go through this a little quicker. I have my password and my message. Remember, whenever I come back, I'm going to do the with credentials. I'm going to pass into my user login, my username or password. If it comes back successfully, it's going to keep my message. And then it's going to set to be my message. And if it comes back otherwise, like it doesn't have this, it's going to say login failed. So then I'm going to go here. I'm going to say P. Hodges. and P. Hodges. And remember, I'm looking at this network tab. I'm going to go ahead and delete this so it doesn't block out what we're doing. I'm going to hit login here. So it did hit my login right here. My headers are opposed to that login endpoint. Here's some cookies. There's the JSession ID. So it sent in my cookies this JSession ID. If I didn't do the with credentials, it would not have sent this. And this is how my backend knows who's even there. So my backend says, okay, this session ID, I know who that user is because I stored that on the Java, or not Java, Spring does that already for you. So that Spring Web does that for you. It stores that user by itself. If you look here, I passed back user successfully logged in. Oh, I forgot to show you where I put that basic at. But whenever I did, when I created a new user, the role I set to be basic. So for those of you that are wanting to do role stuff, I went ahead in my user and said anybody that registers as a user is going to be stored as basic. And then you would have to create like an update user that would then give them like admin access or whatever access if you want to. But by default, it gives them basic. I hard-coded basic to be the first one. Whenever it came back with the user, it told me my user role was basic. And this is where on the front end, I can go to the response. So we just went here, response data, and this says message. That's where it got this. I could do that same thing of set user role and do response data user role because I have access to it. So those of you doing user role stuff, you can do that. You can also do username. You can also send back. So if you look, I'm only sending back. I'm sending back a message. Where's my log? This is too big. Go down. That's the register. That's why. The login. I'm sending back message, username, and user role. I could send back the user as a whole. I could send back the user first name separately, and you can grab it. You can send back almost whatever you want to here, but that's where you would set where you send it back, and then you grab it on the front end. So now that I'm logged in, I don't know if you noticed, but this actually says to-dos and create. So if I go to to-dos, and I go here, it'll actually call my my backend, and it'll say to-dos, go get the to-dos, and my response is blank. Didn't send me back anything. So let's create a to-do. These are separated. This is create. So I'm going to create a to-do. Again, I'm going to block out this thing here. I'm going to hit this create button. When I hit this create button, so let's go to the create to-do. Here's the form just like before. Here's a form on submit. You're going to handle submit. All I have right now is the description and the assigned, and then the submit button. And then over here, it's going to go to the to-dos -new. It's going to type in the description and the assign. And remember, I had to add the with credentials true, so it would send the JSession. When I hit this create, it sends these, instead of in the request body, it actually sends it as parameters. So you could do either way. And so I sent that stuff. The response is to do successfully created. If I look at this, it said insert into to do, and it actually inserted into my SQL thing. It doesn't tell me exactly what it does, but it sends it in there. The cool thing here, though, is let's create another one. Do you see how it says, another thing I want to point out, to do successfully created? That is coming from my actual back end. So my back end says in my message, to do successfully created. I'm grabbing this message from my response. right here, and I'm displaying the message right here. So when I go to my to-dos, I have two of them. I have teach stuff, teach more. Let's say I want to log out, so I'm going to hit this log out feature. When I hit this log out feature, if I go to my application now, oh, it still kept my J session. I wonder what's going to happen here. I already created a user using 1234 earlier. That J session. That J session changed. I don't know if you saw that. It was like 8.8 something, and now it's 6.4. So now my browser is changing the J session ID. And then when I go to to-dos, my teach stuff is not there anymore. This is actually this user's to-dos. I can delete these ones. It deletes it. I can log out. Okay, so first of all, the other thing to check, do you see how it says localhost to-dos? I know you probably can't see that. When I log out and then I try to go to localhost to-dos, it doesn't allow me to. It sends me back to the login screen. I'm actually doing that on the front end, not the back end. How I did that, because some of you were wondering how to do some of this authentication stuff. Instead of using a context, I went ahead and at the app level did an authenticated. And then I did if you're not authenticated, these are the things that I can show in my nav bar. Else do this. So these are the things that would show whenever I was authenticated. And it doesn't really know that I'm a user or anything on the front end. Authenticated is set once I log in. So on my login, it sets my authentication to true if it works. If it doesn't work and there's an error, then it never sets this authenticated to true. So you can kind of look at that. A question came in. So let's log in. Okay, so I'm logged in, right? Here's this. If I refresh this page, ooh. I guess it does not persist if you refresh. I'd have to Google how to do that. So it'll let me, oh, yeah, and that's part of that is due to not having a context. I think if you have a context, whenever you do that auth provider, so again, I didn't do an auth provider either. If you do an auth provider, I think that auth provider goes and checks to see if you're authenticated, kind of in behind the scenes. I don't have that at all. Yeah, and again, I'm taking a step back. Instead of making the authentication login stuff more difficult and showing you like how to deep dive into it, what I tried to do is come up with the easiest way, in my opinion, to do this for your project. This is not what I would do for production, but this will, for those of you that have not done the login stuff, I think this will get you as close as you need for your project as fast as possible. I would definitely do the use context and or the auth provider. Yeah, these routes are only viewable or even able to be viewed. This isn't even viewable. This is even to be able to hit them. So whenever you wrap a route with authenticated, wrap a route, not your nav. Your nav, this is being able to be viewed because links are viewed, where routes are actually being able to go to it. So, all right. I think that's all I really wanted to show on this thing because I wanted to give you guys plenty of time to get back and working on your project. But I think there's some kind of studio or activity that they want you to do first. it's not too much. It's like learning what you're going to do after LaunchCode, how you're going to keep learning, how you're going to keep up with your GitHub activity, those kind of things. So the question, do I need to set the user and the controller in order to use the user ID and no, but it needs to know what user. So again, it needs to know what user. So that's where to be able to set this user in my to-do, I had to give it a user. And for me, I'm going to pull the user from the session. You technically, one way you could do this, you could have a request parameter string with username. And then you could, instead of doing it this way, you can set the user you could do something like this. So if you aren't using sessions, you could just make it be sent by a username and or a user ID or whatever you want to there, and then just do the find by username instead of the user from the session. That's just another idea. I'm not saying you need to do that, but you do need to set the user to be able to use that, because in the to-do model, I said it needs to be a user. I'm going to undo that before I try to save that. Any other questions?